translation. Edgar, can I get you to just share a little bit with us about what you do there?
Yeah. I used to serve as a Bible translator. And then later on, I joined the management team of the Philippine Bible Society. But because of my training at the seminary, I was encouraged to join the group of translation consultants. And so, but one of the major requirements to become a Bible Society translation consultant is that you need to have a PhD. And that's the main reason why I went to the UK for my PhD. And since then, I have handled projects in the Philippines, and also I was invited to also join the UBS, the United Bible Society's pool of translation consultants. And in 2018, I joined the editorial committee of the UBS Greek New Testament 6th edition as the permanent representative of UBS. So
let me pause you there, Edgar, because I want to make that, I want to let that sink in for the students so they didn't connect those dots. So remember, guys, we use the Nestle 28. The counterpart to this is the UBS, which is designed specifically for Bible translators like Edgar and the folks he works with. Okay. Edgar is now on that committee. That's a very storied, famous committee that we'll talk about later in the course when we look at the history of these editions. And Edgar is now on it. So when they make a bad decision, we get to blame Edgar later. Right, Edgar? Is that? No, but maybe in the Q&A, Edgar, we'll get you to talk a little bit about your role there with UBS, because I'm sure that's fascinating work that you get to do there. But just again, think about what Edgar's saying is he gets to represent Bible translators all across the world and help give input on this edition that gets used around the world to help translate the Bible. So really extraordinary work that Edgar's involved in. As you can hear, he's heavily sought after by translation groups around the world. So, all right. Anything else, Edgar, you want to say by way of introduction?
I'm married to Irene, and we have one gorgeous son. And besides being, or before I was a scholar or a textual critic or a papyrologist, I was a pastor. So I never left the pastorate in the exercise of my scholarship.
Yeah. And I should also, one other thing I should mention is Edgar is coming to us not only from the Philippines, but from the future, I believe. It's Friday there, right?
It is.
It's Friday morning where he's at, guys. So this is really a treat all around. All right, Edgar, I'm going to stop making jokes now and let you give your presentation. And then if you can, just save some time at the end. We'll do some Q&A, okay?
Okay. Let me share my screen. And so this is my presentation for Brett, Jesse, and Peter, my friend. This was first presented in an SBL annual meeting in San Francisco, but I have since updated this presentation, adding some more data to what I had in 2011. So it's a topic, part of a chapter in my dissertation as well. But as I have said, I have updated this portion. And I'd like to, you're the very first one who will benefit from that updating and revision. So P46 with the Pastorals and a Misleading Proposal. This is a kind of a response to an article published, a journal article published with the title P46 and the Pastorals, a misleading consensus, something like that. So we will look at that article later on. But let me give you a brief, very brief background about Papyrus 46. Later on, I will simply refer to it as P46. It's the earliest and most extensive surviving textual witness to the Pauline epistles. And I am disposed to dating it from 175 to 225 CE. And I tried to present some arguments for this dating in my dissertation. These are this manuscript, the pages, 172 pages, surviving pages of P46 are divided between Dublin at the Chester Beatty Library and the Michigan Papyrological Collection in Ann Arbor. And so if you have time to go to Michigan, just go to the library and or the papyrological collection and enjoy P46 among other manuscripts that they have in their holdings there. And in terms of contents, it contains Romans and then followed immediately by Hebrews, 1st and 2nd or 1 and 2 Corinthians, and then Ephesians, Galatians, Philippians, Colossians, and then a very fragmentary portion of 1 Thessalonians. And it's a single quire, single column papyrus codex. It's important to note that down. And produced, I believe, by a single scribe with at least 2 to 3 more identifiable correctors. And the text is written in scriptio continua or continuous script and in a calligraphic majuscule. So with this brief backgrounder about P46, I'd like us to delve into the topic now, to the main presentation about the missing pages of P46. And it has to do with the proposal by the British papyrologist Kenyon, Frederick Kenyon, in when he published the complete transcription, and a year later the facsimile of P46, wherein he made a proposal that there must have been 7 leaves missing at the end and an equal 7 leaves missing at the first pages of P46. And while explaining the codicological profile of P46, he later on suggested that there are still 7 leaves of the codex to account for, corresponding to the 7 lost in the beginning. And he mentioned for the first time that this is not enough for the Pastoral Epistles, and that the space required is nearly twice as much is available. And that he suggested that probably there were about 10 pages blank, or if the Pastorals and Philemon were added, another maybe 4 pages were added. So that was the proposal of Kenyon when the whole P46 was published. But how did Kenyon arrive to this conclusion? How did he know that there were 7 missing or 14 missing pages or 7 missing leaves at the back and also at the front? Well, as most papyrologists or codicologists would do, he began by looking at the extant pages and look at how the codex was constructed. And since this is a single quire codex, it was supposedly a lot easier for him to reconstruct the number of pages, at least the original theoretical original number of pages. So F97 is the last page, and the last surviving page, and folio 8 is the first missing first extant leaf for P46. And until now, this is a conjoint by volume. So we have here the last page and the first extant page of P46. And then from there, he worked on towards locating the first page with an intact page number. And that happens when he came to page 21, which was marked with kappa. That's our pagination number for 20. So as you can already know that it is most likely that the first page was not numbered. So we have 21, one page without a page number. And from there, he tried to reconstruct the codicological profile of P46. As you can see, we have missing pages and extant pages. And when he tried to present this, particularly after the text of First Thessalonians, he thought that the corresponding missing text of Romans could easily fit in the 7 leaves or 14-page missing page scheme. But he doubted the inclusion of first 1 and 2 Timothy's and Titus and Philemon, the Pastorals and Philemon, arguing that it is very impossible to have all these books by Paul included or accommodated in the missing 7 pages or 7 leaves. And he then proposed that it's easier to look at this phenomenon by counting the space needed for, or approximating the space needed to accommodate the text of 2 Thessalonians, the Pastorals, and Philemon. But the question would be, is that how was the required space for these epistles computed by Kenyon and also by other students of P46? And here I tried to at scholars who proposed the number of pages needed with their comparison based explicitly mentioned, and also their analysis. There are other scholars who mentioned about the needed number of pages, but they did not provide any comparison base. So I excluded them from this list. So we have here Kenyon, his 2 editions, and Sanders, and then Jack Finnegan and Robert Grant. For Kenyon, at first he said nine pages were left blank, and then in 1936, he then later on mentioned that perhaps 10 pages were left blank because the available space for the scribe was just 23 and 1/4 pages. And then Sanders mentioned that the scribe would have needed 21 pages after the last extant page. And then Finnegan said that 13 pages are not enough. And then Robert Grant also proposed 24 pages. So roughly it's 20, 21, 23, 24 pages are needed to accommodate the text, the combined text of Second Thessalonians up to Philemon. Now, that was the consensus. And then later on, in 1998, a journal article by Jeremy Duff somehow questioned the consensus. And it is an NTS journal entitled P46 and the Pastorals, a misleading consensus. And he tried to argue in this article that the by looking at the increasing trend of text, number of text copied onto the last pages, extant pages of P46, there betrays a kind of intention on the part of the scribe to include the pastorals and Philemon. And his proposal is that he described the consensus as fitting very badly the actual evidence, referring to the proposals by Kenyon and Sanders and others. And he rejects the view that P46 reflects a collection of letters to the churches as opposed to the letters to individuals. And so he doesn't believe that the pastorals and Philemon are not in this codex because they were written for individuals. So he rejected that suggestion. And then he builds his case on the conspicuous scribal activity of the, and this is his term, relatively increasing number of characters to a page in the second half of the manuscript, indicating scribal intention to include the pastorals and the Philemon. So that's his main proposal. And then, and I call this the increased output equals scribal intention theory. He then presented a graph to bolster his suggestion that there is indeed a relatively steady increase in terms of text output by the scribe. And as you can see, there is a upward trend by looking simply at this graph. And then he said it is very unlikely that he would have compressed his writing so much simply in order to leave the 10 pages blank in response to Kenyon's proposal. And then he suggested, he then shared his methodology that he tried to adjust the NAUBS text to P46 spelling. And then he also offered some averaging number of characters for the titles, the stichois, and the paragraphoi. And he came up with the number 24,650 letters or characters that needed to be copied onto the pages after the last page of First Thessalonians. And he also believed that the scribe needed 24 pages to include everything. So how did he support his proposal? By presenting two scenarios. One is that due to the scribal miscalculation, the pastorals were not included, but were intended to be included by the scribe. So that was his first proposal. And the second, which he prefers, is that 8 pages or 2 sheets of papyrus sheets were added to include the pastorals and Philemon, thereby making P46 not a single choir but 2 choirs, one with a big pile of papyrus sheets, and the other with the additional 8 pages. So that's how he is questioning the consensus. He in effect, he was arguing for the strong possibility that the Pastorals and Philemon were originally part of P46, on the belief that P46 supports the canonical nature of the Pastorals, as a response to other scholars who were arguing that the Pastorals and Philemon are not Pauline, on the basis that even the scribe of P46 doubts the canonicity of this book. So essentially, it is in this context that Jeremy Duff was proposing his inclusion, his theory of having the Pastorals and Philemon in P46. But I raised some questions about Duff's method. First is that character counting based on the modern text, supposedly adjusted to the spelling of P46, can be a very arbitrary criterion if done mechanically, since P46 orthographic profile is not only regularly inconsistent, but also very unpredictable at times, and therefore can make a significant statistical difference in cases of the eroded portions. And number one is the case of itacism, wherein our scribe is very prone to commit. And also the phenomenon of nomina sacra, wherein you have long words abbreviated into at least 2 to 3 characters. So there is the shortening of text there if you will just look at these two phenomena. And then also, Duff failed to categorically mention what kinds of spelling adjustments he made on the UBS text. He just made a general statement about adjustment, but he did not mention what kinds of adjustments did he make. And this method also implicitly presupposes that the scribe no longer committed incremental omissions, or what we call leaps, in the missing pages that could have affected the text length. And I'll try to show later on that leaps is one of the scribal habits, at least the more identifiable habits of P46 scribe. So also, history carries the burden of proving that it is indeed the text of the Pastorals and Philemon that the scribe intended to include in the missing pages. And here I found his argument a bit circular. And the supposed increasing trend in the second half of P46 alone does not categorically prove anything about the intention of our scribe to include the Pastorals and Philemon. I believe that paratextual features must also be taken into consideration. To ascribe intention, one must equally marshal proofs that the scribe was not only increasing character density, but also intentionally saving space, so that he could put more text onto it. So it's not only the increasing number of letters, but also paratextual indications that he was saving his space, especially if the scribe already knew that he was already running out of space when he reached the midpoint of the codex. Now, how then should we address the question of calculation in the missing pages? And my Dr. Vather, David Parker, recommended that it's better to count the actual number of characters in the extant pages and draw appropriate conclusions, rather than start from a modern critical text start with the manuscript itself and try to profile the copying habits of this scribe. So I tried to do that, and in producing my own transcription of P46, I also counted all the extant characters, and with the reconstruction, of course, on every page, and tried to make some analysis from there. Adjustments of the textual base to conform to the predictable form of the text of P46 should be explicitly identified and must be based on the actual copying habits of the original hand. And so I based on the scribe's actual variation profile in the extant pages affecting the length of the text. For instance, nomina sacra, itacisms, additions, and scribal lips or incremental omissions. To validate the theory of increased output equals intention, paratextual features must also be integratively taken into consideration, such as script size and book titles, number of lines to a page, number of characters to a line, and their space implications. So that's that's my proposal in terms of methodology. So let's look at the paratextual profile of P46. And in terms of script size, I've noticed that there is indeed increase in line numbers, but there is also a very conspicuous constancy in script size and spacing. This is the first extant, the last the first part of Romance, and I tried to, when I visited Chester Beatty and Ann Arbor, I tried to I look at their sizes, and it's constantly at 0.3 to 0.35 centimeters in terms of the letters, and the interlinear spaces is bigger actually. 0.4 to 0.5 centimeters. So that's the first part of the codex. But when you go to the last part of the extant page, when you look at their sizes, well, they're essentially the same. It's still 0.3 to 0.35 in terms of the letters, with some exceptions of the really small letters, which I will also try to show later on. And in terms of the interlinear space, it's still 0.4 to 0.5 centimeters. So it's in terms of script size and interlinear spacing, it's very constant. Now, here is what I mean with the smaller letters. With a question that if the scribe was really intent on putting in more text on the remaining pages, the scribe could have written in smaller sizes. And if you will look here, we have omicrons here. And this is the biggest omicron. It's the natural size, the usual size, so 0.3. But the scribe could also write 0.2, but in fact, he could write 0.1 centimeter. So the scribe has the capability to write smaller sized letters. And he could have opted to use this when he was already when he might have noticed that he was running out of space. He could have written 0.2 or 0.1 centimeters. That would have afforded him more space. So for me, this is not a proof of space economy. He was not saving space. He just kept on copying as though it's business as usual. from the very first page, comparing it with the last extant pages, the sizes, script sizes are the same. Now, in another is book title and the subscription, the lone surviving subscription. Here we have the book title for Galatia. And when I measured it, it's just 2.6 centimeters, barely 3 centimeters. And when you put that in context, how many lines would be covered when you have 2.6 centimeters on that page? It's around equal to around 3 to 4 lines of text. And if you have say 30 letters per line, that's 120 letters equal. But it's just 2.6 centimeters. When you go to Philippians, it's bigger, 4 centimeters. But in context, it's about six lines. So depending on the survival state of the page, we can have an idea how many lines and therefore how many characters could these 4 centimeters covered. In terms of Colossians, you have 2.9 and it's 2.9. Although it was close to 2.6, it could cover at least five lines. And the last title or titlos, so we have 3.5 centimeters, and this is for First Thessalonians. And somehow it's about 5 lines as well, could cover 5 lines. Now, when we go to Corinthians, because these are written on a new page, my reference was the lower part of the character and the lower part of the page number. But at least you can have roughly you can have a measurement of around 3 centimeters as well. And here we have the subscription of 2 Corinthians, and this is the page, the whole page, the lower part. The surviving page is 22 centimeters, 0.2 centimeters, and I believe that in its original state, P46 codex was 28 centimeters in terms of height. And so you have a difference of 5.8 centimeters. In context, 5.8 centimeters, that's for the scripture. And then the last line of 1 Corinthians is 9 points down to the bottom is 9.7 centimeters. And 9.7 centimeters actually could cover around 10 to 12 lines. So when you try to look at all these paratextual indicators and put them together in terms of the number of lines that could have been covered by correspondingly by the book titles, you have 45 lines at least, or a total of 29, almost 30 centimeters. That would be equal to 45 lines, and that will be more than a page. Okay, so the implication is that the book titles could have been written in just 2 centimeters or 3 centimeters, but the scribe, even after the midpoint of the codex, he was using more space than what is required of the book titles. He could have saved spaces there for his text, but it seems to me that he was more interested in the aesthetic aspect of his copying task rather than trying to economize space. And all he needed was 3 lines. And So if we look at the requirement for the book titles, he only needed 24 lines, a equal of 24 lines, but which means that he lost about 21 lines, or 2/3 of a page. Okay, 2/3 of a page. So just by looking at that, it doesn't look that he was really saving his space. It's not a proof of space economy. Now, in terms of line and character profiles, this is from Duff, and he calls this a relatively steady increase. And just by looking at that, you will see certainly an upward trend. But this is a bit deceptive because this is arranged in 5-page intervals, not page per page interval. When you put it on a page by page scheme, this will be the picture. And you will notice that um, the kind of increase in the last pages of P46 resemble the kind of increase that we have on the first part of the codex. Although in number, they are not the same, but the pattern is almost similar. Especially when you look at the page by page line profile. Here you would see that there is indeed some pages that jump from 30 to 32 lines per page. But that is also deceptive because there are a number of instances in P46 wherein you have 32 lines, but a 30-line page in terms of the character count is bigger than the page with 32 lines. And I have documented those pages in my thesis. So when you put them side by side, I kind of doubt Duff's relatively steady increase. For me, it's really more of a fluctuating increase, and it indicates to me, at least, that the scribe may not be intending to do what Duff has proposed, to include pastorals and Philemon. Now, in terms of the textual profile, let's look at the textual profile. There are different kinds of variations in P46, like in any other manuscript. But I'd like us to look at the last two, additions and omissions, because they affect the length of the text. And here, let's begin with the addition. This is the cumulative number of additions when compared with the NAUBS text. There are 148 cases of additions in P46, corresponding to an addition of 517 letters or characters. So that's the addition part, which means that in terms of the 517 added characters, and then you divide that with the extant number of pages, you will have a result of 3 letters per page added. So 3 added letters per page. And if you will multiply that with the supposed 14 missing pages, means that an additional 42 characters were added to the text. And I'm, of course, presuming that there were still additions in the missing pages. So somehow 2 lines were added to that text that he needed to inscribe. Now, when we go to omissions, there are two types that I categorize it into two. One is grammatical omission. These are one word or at least one or two words or just a letter omissions. And I documented 363 cases corresponding to 1,176 letters. Okay. And then in terms of the scribal lips, these are big words that were lost because of homoiotoluton or homoarcton and or haplographies. And there are 71 cases that I documented, totaling to 1,425 letters omitted. Now, when you combine them together, there are 2,601 letters that were lost because of these unintentional omissions. And so that's one omission. And nomina sacra, you also decrease the text length there because you are abbreviating words there. And here you can see that in the text of 2 Thessalonians to Philemons, these are the projected occurrences of the nomina sacra, totaling to 242 cases, translated into number of letters. So there is a movement there from the full spelling to the abbreviated representation, the nomen sacrum. So we have 1,328 total in terms of the full spelling, but that is reduced to 611. So you have a text shortening phenomenon here in nomina sacra. Now let's put them all together. So you have 2,601 combined omissions, and then you divide that with the extant pages, giving you a 15 letters lost per page. And multiply that with the 14 missing pages, and we have 212 projected lost letters in the 14 pages. And add to that the 611 nomina sacra abbreviation, and you have 823 letters off. Okay. And although that's letters off, it's an omission of letters. Actually, that is a space gain for our scribe. Okay, he lost this number of letters, but actually that's a space gain for our scribe. And if you will multiply that, or if you will add that to the 14 supposed pages, he actually theoretically had 14 pages and almost 15 pages available space to him. Okay, and theoretically we can represent this with that one. But the question is, if you have 14 to 15 pages available, how many characters needed to be copied on these pages? And I tried to also, again, with the adjustment based on the writing profile of the scribe, I came up with the 24,415 letters that needed to be copied onto these pages. And but the question is, how many characters was written on each page based on the profile, scribal profile mentioned in the or established in the extant pages. The most logical, methodologically logical thing to do is to look at the nearest pages. And so here I propose a 22, 16, 10 page, 6, 4 average, so that we can have an idea of how many letters could have been possibly copied onto the supposed missing pages. The proposal of DAF is 1,000 50 per letters per page, and now we know that it's a 10-page average. But we can also look at the last column being the biggest, 1075. Okay, 1075 letters per page. That gives us an idea. However, there's another codicological given that must be included as well, which Duff did not consider, that the outer pages of the missing folia must be presumed to be wider than the extant pages, given that P46 is a single quire. So when it was folded, some trimming was done so that it's aesthetically beautiful. So if you have a single quire codex, the outer pages are indeed wider than the inner pages. And in this case, 14 piles of papyrus sheaf will really give you a wider writing space. Now, EJF already noted this, and he roughly estimated that the corresponding letter increase in the missing pages would have been could have been placed at 10%. So that's his estimation. But I also tried to make my own computation, and I think that 10% is very generous. I think it's only about 4.8% increase in terms of the space available to the scribe. But for the sake of argument, I will use F's suggestion at 10% and see how this will affect the number of characters that could have been written on the pages. So this is the one we have later and earlier, and then I also added here F93 at 1090, because that's the biggest single page with characters from on the extant pages. And then with that, we add the 10% increase. So we will now have a bigger number of letters that could have been copied onto each page. Now, the biggest here is 1,199, and we can use that, or the 1,113. So, but we will try to look at how many pages could have been needed if we are using these averages. With this, at the bottom, you will note that if we will use 1,113, the scribe would have needed 21 or 22 pages. If we will use the highest average at 1,199, the scribe would have needed 21 pages only. So here we have a case of decreasing number of required pages. From the proposed 24, here we have an idea that it's possible that the scribe only needed 20 pages or 21 pages. But what's the implication? The available space supposedly for 14 pages still is not enough for the 20 or 21 pages required. You still need another 7 pages or 8 pages. So it's not enough to accommodate cumulatively the text of 2 Thessalonians, Pastorals, Philemon. 2 Thessalonians could easily fit with the remaining 14 pages. But with Pastorals and Philemon, it's very difficult, even if we account for all the possible reductions of text based on its scribal habits. Additional pages might have been added. But in the absence of actual evidence, this remains a mere possibility. So the standing question is, which books occupied the enigmatic 14 pages? I have said already, I think 2 Thessalonians was part of this codex, because when you look closer at the book title of 1 Thessalonians or 1 Thessalonian, it has the designator alpha, Pros Thessalonica alpha, which means that there was a Pros Thessalonica beta, the 2 Thessalonians. But how about the others? Maybe we need to ask this question. Have we asked all the pertinent questions already? Because everyone is presuming that, are working on the presumption that there were 14 missing pages. Maybe we need to raise how many pages are really missing based on the evidence. And the traditional page calculation, again, is looking at the page numbers, the extant page numbers, to determine the actual number of pages for this codex. And as I've said earlier, the earliest extant is kappa, or page 20, but it's actually page 21 already. And then at the center fold, you have this folio 52 and verso and 53 recto, showing both the horizontal fibers, because that's the center fold. So row alpha and row beta, 104 supposedly, and page 105 supposedly. However, before this opening, before this center fold, we have an unnumbered page. So Kenyon thinks that this is an accident. I kind of doubt that. However, the pages, according to Kenyon, were numbered throughout, and nearly all the page numbers are preserved. By a mistake, the scribe, however, 2 pages escaped numeration, so that henceforth the page numbers are lower than 2 than they should have been. Now, so when you look at these 2 pages, RNB and RN, and if you are looking at this text, immediately you will come to an impression that there are 2 persons involved here, just by looking at the way the text, the scripts were written. One is very neat, thin. The other, the page number is, the ink is denser, and the ink color is even darker. That gives us an idea that the paginator was not the original scribe. The one who appended the page number was not the scribe. And this is my belief, that the page numbers were written after the book, or the codex was completed, and another person put on the page number. So again, when you look at this page, you will notice the difference in terms of the scripts. Now, Gunder Zuntz described the scribe who made this page, the page numbering, as one who used a broad pen and very black ink, who also added the page numbers and wrote the stichoi under its epistle. In other words, this is the hand of the ex officio corrector who applied the finishing touches to the work of the original scribe. So it's more like an editor, our modern idea of an editor or corrector. So the importance of this paleographical fact is that the scribe who copied the text of P46 was not guided by the page numbering because it was after the fact of copying. Page numbers were put on after the book, this codex was constructed. So somehow I have some doubts in using exclusively the page numbers as our main guide in identifying how many pages are indeed missing. Now, I'd like to propose an alternative page calculation method. And my proposal is that we do not only approximate the numbers related to the inscription of 2 Thessalonians up to Philemon text, but also look back at Romans, the corresponding first pages that are missing. Although it has been studied for so many decades now, none has approached this question by including Romans. So here, I tried to present an analysis of the text in Romans. Now, using the same methodology applied in the last missing pages, we will also apply this methodology on the first missing pages. And in terms of the text that needed to be inscribed on the missing pages from chapter 1 to chapter 5, verse 16, there's a projection of 10,437 letters that could have been written on the missing pages. Now, that's really way below when you compared with the 24,000 plus letters that needed to be inscribed on the corresponding missing pages at the back. But anyway, we apply the same method. And again, we have the 22-page, 16-page, 10-page, 6-page, and then 6-page average and 2-page. And you will see at the bottom the number of characters that could have been, average number of characters that could have been used in the missing pages, depending on the kind of average that you will adopt. And here, the biggest would be 888, and that would be a 10-page. And now this already includes, this time I did not use 10% increase, but only 5% increase, which means that it's smaller than the 10%, and that would have given the scribe more space. Now, when we look at the various possible page requirements using those averages, in order to put on the text, the book title, and then the chapters 1 to chapter 5, verse 16, if we will use 879 per page, the scribe needed only 11.9 pages, or roughly 12 pages. And if we will use the 857 per page, the scribe needed 12.2 page. So just by looking at this, you will get an idea that with a little bit of compressing, especially when there are a lot of thinner letters, the scribe only needed at least 12 pages to have the page of Romans, the missing text of Romans chapter 1 to 5. Now, what are the possible scenarios? One is that the first leaf, or the hypothetical pages 1 to 2, was blank and served as the outer protective covering for the codex, because he only needed 12 pages for the text of Romans. So the first leaf was left blank, front and back, and it served as the cover page, the covering for the whole of the codex. Hence, the scribe started writing onto the codex in the second half of the hypothetical page 3. Another scenario, possible scenario, is that the scribe might have started writing his text on the hypothetical page 4, and the hypothetical page 3 served as the outer covering, which means that there were only 12 missing pages at the beginning and also at the end, and not 14 pages as have been previously suggested. Now, with this, we need to raise new questions on the question of content of P46. If only 12 pages were missing and not 14, which books or materials were then included in these missing pages? As I've said, 2 Thessalonians was most likely part of this codex, but after 2 Thessalonians, what were included? Did the scribe really intend to include the pastorals in these pages as Duff proposed? Or any of the books of the pastorals, maybe an abridged form of the pastorals as Sanders proposed? But if so, do we have surviving evidence that the books of the pastorals circulated independently? I'm not sure if we have any codex or manuscript with only 1 Timothy or 2 Timothy or just Titus. Or did other Christian books occupy these pages? Maybe not part of the 27 canonical books, but Christian book nonetheless. Or did the scribe terminate his copying task after completing 2 Thessalonians and left the some 7 to 8 pages blank, which is not really unusual in our manuscripts? Now, let me offer some conclusions from this. We have shown that a fresh integrative methodological approach that is inclusive of codicological, paleographical analysis to the problem of content of the last missing pages of P46 can yield more concrete data in reinterpreting the available evidence. And using this approach, we argued that the increasing number of characters in the second half of the codex does not prove anything about the intention of the scribe to include the pastorals and Philemon. The scribe was simply not saving his space use. Now, indeed, there certainly must have been a reason for or reasons for the fluctuating increase. But wisdom dictates to simply accept the fact that at present we cannot know for certain what the reason or reasons is. We can only prove what it is not. And in this case, it's not to include pastorals. What this presentation equally underscored is a call for caution in claiming scribal intentionality based simply on a text-focused analysis. We need to be integrative. When painting a profile of scribal intention of any manuscript, not only P46, we need an integrative database of all scribal activities or performances derivable from its pages, inclusive of the text copied by its scribes, and how these texts were copied and what other features accompanied this text. Only an integrative analysis will solidly support a claim about scribal intentionality and can help us better appreciate the enigma of the missing pages in P46. And finally, does P46 categorically question the canonicity of the pastorals and Philemon? Hence, its scribe did not include them in this book, in his codex. It is an extremely vital question, but it is an intriguing question. I believe we cannot categorically answer at this time, given our still limited evidence. It would have been a great theological relief had P46 conclusively settled this question, but it does not. Nevertheless, with this new appreciation of the available evidence, perhaps we can, in the meantime, be content in saying that P46 is not the most definitive place to raise the canonical nature of the Pastorals and Philemon. And thank you. I end with that.
Thank you so much, Edgar. We really appreciate that. Clearly, a tremendous amount of work has gone into that presentation and, of course, dissertation behind it. So thank you so much. It gives such a great illustration of how important understanding how manuscripts work is when you ask a question like this. It's not simply enough to say, well, how many pages might have been left? You have to take into account the number of lines and the size of letters and titles and all the rest of it. So that's exactly what we're going to get into more tonight in the rest of the class and next week. So let me stop. I've got some questions I can ask Edgar, but I want to let my students ask first. So Brett and Jesse, if you guys have any questions, go ahead.
Thanks again, Edgar. I wanted to ask specifically about the pagination. I was a little confused. Is every page paginated?
There's an opening that is not numbered. The opening, the 2 pages before the centerfold, it does not have.
Is 20 and 21?
It's page 100, 102, 103. It's not page. It's not numbered. And somehow in the dissertation, I argued that probably it was not an accident, but probably it was an attempt to salvage an earlier mistake in the page numbering that have happened in the missing pages. So, or at least in the pages still extant, but we do not have the portion where it has the page numbers. But yeah, but pagination numbers, page numbering, by the way, based on the extant manuscripts that we have, is also used in various ways. There are codices already documented by earlier papyrologists, wherein the pages, page numbering, are not sequential. And at times, page numbering also started at the middle of the codex. So this has been documented by Turner in his paleographical work. So it's better to refer to Turner's work in terms of page numbering. But for P46, at least from the extant pages, one opening does not have page numbers. And also, let me add that there are some pages with extant page numbers wherein above the page numbers, you have the crossbar or a line above the letters. And that's quite confusing because it only happened, I think, twice in P46. So it raises another question: why did the scribe who put the page number put a crossbar on top of these 2 pages? And I have not found the answer yet. Just a question. I hope I was able to answer your question.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, Edgar, as you were showing the pictures of P46, you pointed out a few things that were interesting. I was amazed, one, at how uniform the lines were. You showed kind of the spacing that was really consistent within the writing as well as the lettering. But you also showed the different sizes of letters. Does this speak to the quality of the scribe? Like, is this a good scribe we're looking at, or a poor scribe, or kind of an in-between, or?
Yeah, good question. And we have to put that in context in terms of understanding what we mean by good scribe, because you can profile a scribe by the way he copied his text, or you can profile the scribe by the kind of in terms of the quality of the text he produced. Sometimes there are scribes who wrote really very beautiful, but miss a lot of things in his text from copying his text. There are also very badly written manuscripts, but in terms of the quality of the text they produce, the quality is higher. So if we are talking about the word good scribe in terms of aesthetics, the scribe of P46 writes a very beautiful majuscule compared with other papyrus manuscripts. And it's when you compare it with, for instance, with some of the Bodmer papyri, P46 really more beautiful. Even with P47 or P45, P46 is even more beautiful aesthetically. Now, when we go to the second profile, did he produce a quality text? That's another story, because even though the scribe wrote beautiful scripts, there are many instances, and I noted already that there are 71 instances wherein he committed haplographies. He missed a number of lines because of letter formations. And in my dissertation, I argued that some of these 71 instances may have not been from the scribe himself, but from that the exemplar he was copying from already contained those scribal lips. And I tried to identify possible candidates for that. So it is a standard appreciation of the scribe of P46 that he did a beautiful codex, but in terms of the text that he produced, there is some doubts as to the level of his attention when he was copying his exemplar. Is he good? Yes, very, very good writer, copyist. But in terms of the text he produced, there are doubts.
Very good. Thank you very much, Edgar. For the sake of time, because we've got to keep going in our class, and knowing that you've got things to do there in the Philippines, we're going to let you go. But just want to say thank you again so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us, and especially for joining us from so far away and sharing your expertise with us. It's been a real treat.
Pleasure, Peter. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edgar.
Thanks for teaching us.
Thank you, Edgar.
All right, the rest of you have to stay. We'll let Edgar go.